Welcome everyone to this first cloud debate on the fourth industrial revolution hosted here at the University of Johannesburg. Tonight we're going to talk about two of the sort of overarching aspects of the fourth industrial revolution, and that is man versus machine. This idea of what happens to humanity in this rapidly or fast evolving technological environment. And with me I have a panel of experts that I'm going to introduce to you shortly. And of course what we're going to do is not only discuss it with the panel tonight, we're going to channel questions from all of you, wherever you tune in from, whether you're at the office or you may be in the car on your way home or you're sitting at home. But we hope to feed some of your questions as well to the panelists that we have with us here tonight, and we look forward to doing so. First, my name is Ylva Rodney-Gomerde, and I'm a professor of journalism here at UJ. And as I said, I have an excellent panel of experts with me here tonight. And to my immediate right, I have a colleague here at UJ, Professor Barbara Paul, who is the serving director of the Institute for Intelligence Systems here at UJ. A very, very warm welcome to you. It's lovely to have you here.
Thank you.
And right next to Professor Paul, we have Dr. Oscar van Heerden, who is the Senior Executive Director of Internationalization here at UJ. He's also a colleague and someone who writes in the media as well on issues around the fourth industrial revolution. So lovely to have you with us.
Thanks.
And right next to Dr. van Heerden, we have Kamal Ramasinghe, who is one of our first industry experts to be with us here tonight. And Kamal is, as he says himself, self-confessed life servant of technology and ICTs. I think that's really, really interesting, with more than 3 decades of expertise in the area as well. So we're absolutely pleased to have you with us, Kamal.
Thank you.
Warm welcome to you as well. And right next to Kamal, we have Bongani Sithole, who is a technologist, blogger, entrepreneur, with an interest in blockchain technologies, the Internet of Things, and artificial intelligence, with long experience in this field as well. So a warm welcome to you, Bongani. Lovely to have you here. And right next to Bongani, we have Dr. Nicola Taylor, who is also a colleague, because you are a UJ alumni. But right now you are the director of JBR, Psychometrics. But as I said, you're also an alumni by the fact that you are a research associate with the Department of Industrial Psychology and People Management here at the university. So a warm welcome to you, Nicola. It's lovely to have you here. And last but not least, right at the end of the table, we have Toby Shapshak, who is a media expert and the editor-in-chief of the magazine Stuff. And he is also a columnist, among other things, for Financial Mail. He's had a couple of TED Talks and writes on technology, often from very interesting and provocative perspectives. So it's lovely to have you with us.
Thank you very much.
A warm welcome to you.
I thought you were going to say interesting places like Johannesburg.
Yes, that as well. And of course, I mean, big cities are full of technology and smart technologies that are rapidly evolving. So we might launch into that as well. And I think that's important, actually. And we might, as I say, come there. And I think first, though, and I'd like to turn to you, Babu, and ask you a question around, there are a lot of fears, I think, around the fourth industrial revolution. I think that people are fearful of technological change and what's going to happen, and ideas around, technology and man versus machine, and what's going to happen to humanity. Technology is going to take over. Jobs, are they going to be lost, for example? So, what are your takes on that?
No, thank you. Actually, we generally fear change. Means on our way to the office in the morning, if we don't get traffic, then we will fear that what has happened. Is there something wrong? Now we need to see a bit of in the history also. Now, if you look at the first industrial revolution, there was a huge fear when the first industrial revolution was happening, when the steam engine was coming in, when our handlooms were becoming steam powered. And there was a huge fear of job loss, and there was job loss. There is no doubt in it. And we landed with the Luddite protest. Similarly, with the second industrial revolution also, we had a fear that automation and will take over, and electricity was invented then. Electricity, some people say, didn't become popular even in the initial phase. And in the third also, if you see, look at the third industrial revolution, when computer, because most of us are in that generation that when we saw the third industrial revolution in 1970s, 1980s, when computer was coming in, we had a fear that computer will take our jobs. We will not require anything. Maybe we will go to a ticket counter and the computer will give me the ticket, and there was no need for any person to be there. But similarly, the same thing is happening in the fourth industrial revolution also. That is a fear that jobs will be lost. And there were ripple effects after the previous three industrial revolutions, and it subsided. And similarly, to my understanding, there will be ripple effects all over the world after the fourth, means as the fourth industrial revolution progresses. But it depends on individual countries that how you manage it, so that you can bring the ripples to a steady state as fast as you can, depending on how you skill your labor force, how you accept it, how you embrace the fourth industrial revolution. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, thank you for that. I mean, I think that talks to some of the things of the, the broader ideas around, this rapidly, developments of technology and the ubiquity of it. I don't know, Kamal, this idea of, rapidly evolving platforms and the practicalities of it. What's happening?
So I think the first point to support what's been said is technology has always created fear amongst the user community or the intended users of the technology. For the simplest of technologies, the introduction of personal computers, the integration of back office systems, research shows time and time again that the biggest reason that technology investments fail is lack of acceptance of the change by people intended to use it. So this is a prevalent thing. I do think, though, in what we're dealing with the fourth industrial revolution, there's an additional level of fear, and this actually I've seen resides not necessarily now in the potential users of the technology, but in leadership of large organizations, because the technology that we are now dealing with, the technology, the pace at which we are evolving technology is exponential in the true sense. Technology has historically been matured according to Moore's law. The computing power matures every 2 years, etc., doubles every 2 years. That's no longer applicable with the technologies we're dealing with. So the leadership of large or small businesses, organizations, governments are grappling with how they adapt their leadership styles, their organizational structures, their strategies to be able to ingest this technology, to be able to derive value from it. And I think when you combine those two fears, you're dealing with potential panic, unfounded in some cases, but it warrants levels of intervention that ordinarily wouldn't be there. We need to, as much as we're going to prepare the recipients of technology, we need to also prepare the current guardians of corporations to be able to harness the technology better. So it's an additional layer of complexity we're dealing with.
And Oscar, I'm going to turn to you. What happens with humanity in this space?
Well, yeah, this is my main issue, which is humanity 4.0. And I hear what the two previous speakers are saying, but for me the issue is, as human beings, our development has taken a particular trajectory over the centuries. We are prone to destruction, World War I, II, genocides, Holocaust, slavery, etc. And we are now in this fourth industrial revolution, and the question that we must ask is, exactly how are we as human beings going to use technology to try and offset some of those negatives? And are we able to? We're looking at climate change, we're looking at very real socio-economic disparities within, for example, South Africa. And how will the fourth industrial revolution and machines in particular assist in poverty alleviation, inequality, and so on? And so the role of the university in terms of research, what kind of agenda should we be pushing to try and address some of those concerns? And not just a question of, there's genuine questions around work, labor, and of course, will there be an increase in the haves and the have-nots? Those with more money, the Elon Musks of this world and so on, will be able to use technology much better than someone in Alex or in Soweto. And what does that say about us as a human, the human element within the fourth industrial revolution? And I think we need to, as social scientists, perhaps carve out our little niche to try and address some of those concerns.
We'll have reason to come back to that, and I want to take some of the questions that's come up as well from our audience. So we'll come back, and particularly this idea of socioeconomic developments and increased income gaps and also increased information gaps, maybe. But before we go there, Toby, I want to turn to you. You write on technology, and you write a lot on technology from a perspective of how we use it. So what do you see happening in this space?
Well, I think an interesting way to understand the fourth industrial revolution, and we don't really know when it began, when it's truly going to take over, when the third revolution will be kaput. It's a bit of a continuum of shifts between these different ways of doing things, of making things, of producing things, which is what industry is all about, isn't it? And what we're seeing is a continuation of the kind of automation that started at the beginning of the 1900s, where for the first time we started moving from an agrarian-based society. At the beginning of the 1900s, 9 out of 10 people worked in agriculture of some form or other. They lived in small villages, small towns. Big cities were starting to evolve. Commerce of the second revolution, as we know it, was picking up. And now, I think 1 out of 10 people work in agriculture or agriculture-related stuff. So artificial intelligence, robotics, automation, all of this is just an extension of that process that began. And obviously, because we have silicon as a key ingredient of the modern economy, the digitization, the computerization, the automation of all of these processes. I kind of read Man versus Machine, which is good onomatopoeia, but it's probably humanity versus algorithms. And McKinsey came out with a big report last year, the great McKinsey report that had nothing to do with ESCOM, in which they said that something like 800 million jobs are going to be threatened by automation of some kind or other by 2030. Now that's not far away. That's 12 years away. That's probably when my son will be a teenager and beginning to look at what kind of job he would want to do in the world. 800 million people is 1/5 of the global workforce. It's a very significant number. McKinsey also says that 1/3 of the global workforce in richer countries like the USA and Canada, Germany, other parts of Europe are going to have to retrain themselves to do different jobs. So of these 800 million people, it's something like 800 occupations in 46 different countries. This is hugely significant, and I think the thing about this so-called fourth industrial revolution is the pace of change is significantly faster than any of the other transitions between previous generation evolutions or revolutions or changes of systems. A good example is when I started studying journalism in my first year, we had to learn to touch type, right? And we all learned on a typewriter. I had a Twitter exchange with the great William Gibson, the man who invented the phrase cyberspace, and he said he wrote the first of his great novels, Neuromancer, on a typewriter. And I went, wow, and he went, it was the 80s. And I'm like, oh, obviously, yes. I learned to type on a typewriter. In that first year of journalism, the only people who needed touch typing as an essential, mission-critical part of our career were journalists and secretaries. The only people who ever learned shorthand. I only learned about 5 symbols in shorthand. I was always frowned upon by all the court reporters. By the time I finished my degree 4 years later, in the 4th year, everyone was learning to touch type in primary school. It had become such an essential part. Now, will that be a skill my son will have to learn in, say, 5 or 6 years when he goes to primary school? I don't think so. Because the natural interface that we all use to communicate with each other, the primary interface that we communicate is voice. And we're at the beginning of that bell curve, aren't we? The hype cycle of it. Alexa is, you know, the Amazon's answer to voice assistants, and those kinds of voice assistants are the very beginnings of how we will interface with artificial intelligence. Right now, you can ask Alexa for the news or the weather or, you know, kind of silly stuff. It's going to get more and more sophisticated. I was driving here dictating text messages using Siri. You know, if I search for something using Google, I use Google Voice. It's a natural and easy way. Why? Because it's faster than a thumb to say something. I mean, if you look at what's happened with the mobile devices, sure, we carry this incredibly sophisticated, powerful, smart device, but actually using a thumb or one thumb to input words is a lot slower than 10 fingers. It's actually a step back until you start using voice, and suddenly the voice accelerates the pace at which we can interact with the technology. I mean, I know I'm getting a little off the topic, but you know, I use a predictive keyboard called Swipe, which means you don't have to type the word COOL. You just move your finger between the words, and it predicts that, and it guesses your next word. And you know, the autocorrects are sometimes quite spectacular. There should be a website for that. Things my mother said, things my mother texted. But that's the kind of trajectory that I see with where we're going. And people are terrified that they're going to lose their jobs. Yes, it is a very big threat, but also it's an opportunity. A lot of studies say that technology has created more jobs than it's destroyed. You know, there are a whole range of jobs that didn't exist 5 years ago, that didn't exist 10 years ago, you know, and we are going to have to be smarter in how we do that. Prof, I liked what you said about how change averse we are as a species. We really are. We are all resistant to change because, you know, it's the nature of our brains. Our brains learn to do something that's mission critical for our survival, and we carry on doing it even though the environment we live in isn't, you know, the veldt outside Johannesburg 300,000 years ago when humanity started arriving on the scene, as it were. And we just have to learn to change with the pace that reflects the society that we live in. You know, when people say they can't do anything, I always remind them of how many people switched from a BlackBerry to a touchscreen phone, and after the first month of pain, they survived. You know.
I'd like to hear your comments on that, Nicola, because of course as an industrial psychologist, what, you know, or I should say in industrial psychology, I should say rather, you know, you probably have a lot of thoughts, particularly around the job market, but also the changing job market, and this idea of new jobs being created rather than, so I would like to hear your thoughts on that.
Absolutely, I think both are correct. So there will be jobs that are lost or that no longer are relevant. I mean, we don't have milkmen anymore, or lamp lighters, or my favorite knocker-uppers, who they were human alarm clocks. They used to go and knock on people's windows to wake them up. So we don't have those jobs don't exist. They've been replaced.
Wouldn't that just be great? Like, just stop for a second and think about that. Like someone in Joburg trying to knock on the window with an extensible arm that gets past the electric fence, you know. You'd have to have a sign, like one of those signs that says, doing a public service, not a burglar, you know.
Exactly. So those jobs are obsolete now. And we've got, as Toby said, we've got Uber drivers. They didn't exist 5 years ago. We've got social media managers. Those didn't exist 5 years ago. And a whole slew of new jobs that have been created by this wave of technology. So from a job market perspective, or from any perspective actually, anywhere where there is change is opportunity. And it's gives people the opportunity to find a new niche for themselves, to answer a new need in industry, to solve problems that arise because of this. And I don't think that people need to worry so much about the availability of jobs. I think what the fear is very much around my job, not staying relevant. And that's where a lot of the fear comes in. So to just talk a little bit about fear, part of why we fear change so much is because there's potential loss of control. We don't know if we're going to be competent in this new environment or the new way of working? Are we actually going to be able to do this? This fear of the unknown, some people thrive on it, some people love it. Change is really a motivator for people. They love to be innovative and creative and work in these very ambiguous environments, but a lot of people really struggle with that. And with a massive pace of change, you get change fatigue. You think, is this actually going to make my life better, or is it going to be worse? So a lot of things that really create the fear that can be answered. They can be answered once you know what it looks like. But once, if you don't know what the future looks like, there is reason to be afraid because your brain says so. It actually registers this change as an error, and that fear of the unknown being an error means that you put a lot of resources into trying to solve this problem that doesn't really have an answer, and it won't go away until you've resolved it. So it takes up a lot of anxiety, worry, but it doesn't necessarily have to be like that.
And let's stay with that. Bongani, you're an entrepreneur. So we talk about, new jobs being created, for example, or new competencies. So what are those potential new jobs, new competencies? How are we going to adapt them, and what competencies do we need?
Look, it's a little bit difficult to basically tell now what competencies we're going to need. I think if you look at historically where humanity comes from, I think there's kind of like three streams. So you look at governments, you look at corporates, you look at individuals. And I think historically people, to a certain extent, they had some sort of ways to maneuver into different directions because we actually had less controlled environments. So, like for example, someone decided, let's start education, let's start the finance department, let's start this, etc. And all those sorts of things obviously came with, driving a certain agenda, and people decided that, let's join a certain stream depending on what am I interested in. So you find yourself as an accountant because there's a stream that was created by someone whenever, right? You find yourself as a doctor, you find yourself as a lawyer. So I think part of the fear and the disruption, so to speak, that's going to come in, it's because of technology, and AI specifically, seems to be bringing a lot of disruption in those spaces and dismantling all of these industries that we have created as human beings. Is it correct or is it correct? We'll see what the future looks like, right? So these are the jobs that we actually created as human beings previously, and now we want to create new industries using AI and technology to define what the new jobs are going to look like, right? We can actually question that in the next 15 years, do we actually need an accountant? We don't know, right? So if you look at technologies like, IBM Watson, right, which is able to collect a lot of cases across the world and come to a conclusion in a matter of minutes, then you start to question yourself, what is the need for an attorney in the near future, right? So the next question would be that what sort of education that we need to start gearing our kids towards in order for them to be competent, right? So, the last question would be, what is compensation after all, right? So we created compensation on a basis that we've made an assumption that an accountant is more important than a person digging on the street, right? Because of the number of years that you've gone to school and so on and so forth.
Unless they're an ESCOM accountant.
Well, precisely. So now what AI is basically doing is we can start to educate people based on their cognitive ability, right? You no longer need 4 years degrees, 7 years degrees in class because you've got this technological software that can actually assist you to learn at your own pace. And the question would be then, how would compensation comes through? Then the compensation would actually help people to say, you'll be compensated based on your thinking capacity and your thinking level, right? Whatever that you contribute into humankind is how you'll be compensated. So these mundane jobs, we can actually push them to a machine to basically do them. So humanity will actually be paid for how much you can think. And I think to your point, we need to start asking ourselves, how competent are we going to be in the near future against the machine, right? And that will now bring a question of how do we then change our education in order for us to assist future generation to be more of a thinking generation, or rather thinking economy, as opposed to looking for jobs, right? So the near future and the jobs that we'll be creating, we don't know what that will be, but the direction that we're going, it's pretty clear that we're actually going through, rather towards a thinking economy.
What about human ingenuity and fascination? And I've often pointed that out in these kind of debates, that, can an artificial intelligence be created that is fascinated by the world around it? True entrepreneurs, I would say, are people who are, have a certain amount of ingenuity, but also, this idea of fascination. Don't know if you have a comment to that one, Ghana, before I turn to you, Oscar.
Yeah, look.
It was Nadia who had this question,
yeah,
sorry, I should acknowledge Nadia. Yeah.
I think we had a chat earlier on. I think one of the things that is going to be a little bit challenging for the future, specifically for robotics, is that for a human to take, for a machine to take an emotion form, how do you actually teach a machine to understand an African culture versus a Chinese culture, and sitting around the table be able to put up a comment that is actually taking that into consideration? And that is one of the abilities that humans have, which you can't teach a machine to have. It's going to be difficult for a machine to learn that. We're gonna get there, I don't know, right? But to answer your question, I don't know if we're gonna even ever get to that point where a machine is able to be excited by an output, right? But humans are always going to be like that, because of that's how we are created. So I'm able to leave South Africa and go to a different country and be able to adapt as quickly as possible, understand how the people live, and still not forget that I'm a South African, right? And whenever I comment, my background obviously come into play, but I also realize that I'm in a different country, and how I comment and how I bring my expertise to the country, I have to take all of that in consideration and emotions into play. Will a robot get to that space? I don't know.
Just to comment on that, I mean, not that I can speak for machines, but I do think machines are going to say that your identity and your cultural practice gets in the way of rationality and decision making. But I mean, I just wanted to comment on the issue of fear, because it seems a lot of my colleagues are talking of fear that is partly misplaced and should be interrogated. But there is also a fear. I mean, we are a long way off from singularity. I think that is an important point to make.
Yeah.
We are a very, very long way off. It's human beings that are not understanding. The technology of AI is developing at such a rapid pace that even those that are in the industry are sometimes surprised with the speed with which it is happening.
Yeah.
At the moment we still think that it is by and large about us having to input data in order for the machine to interpret, analyze, and come to a decision. But we already have machines that are having huge computing capability, much more than we can ever imagine. Our stock exchanges don't have 400, 500, 1,000 people with 5 different phones anymore. There's, if anything, 20 people. It's a very pristine environment, no shouting. And the reason is because there are massive computers that are actually moving billions of dollars and rands around. And we just defer to the machine.
Yeah.
We obviously the machine must make the right decision.
Yeah.
I'm sure if you've had your 1 or 2 experiences where you get money from the ATM and there's 200 rand short later in the day. And when you actually trace back your steps, very often the ATM gave you 200 rand short. But you just believe that it obviously gave you what you asked for.
We're never going to trust the ATM again.
We don't stand there and count our money.
It's also not safe to count your money.
We quickly put it into our pocket. But it
the
is about
ATM say
deferring.
Transnet.
Sometimes it says no.
So the self-learning aspect is what I'm saying does create enormous fear. And the truth is that, as Toby has indicated, that even in environments such as, for example, in the military environment, often they are now deferring to machines to make critical decisions. You know, and so there are those kinds of fears as well.
Augmented realities.
Yes.
Absolutely. I'm going to let you. Sorry, first, just a quick question, and I know that there are a lot of new terminology. So we mentioned singularity. We're a long way away from singularity. Please explain the concept of singularity to our audience. Anyone wants to have a go at that? Come on, can I?
Well, I think it's the point at which, it's, you know, before I comment, I just want to say something, because Oscar spoke with absolute certainty, and that worries me. Because I think trying to be absolutely certain about when and what's going to happen is a challenge right now. So this concept of singularity, of when machines actually are no longer in our control, they're clever enough, they're smart enough, that's the ultimate fear, right? And I know you want to talk about the movie industry and the fear that's created and so forth. And are we a far away from that? I think the common wisdom says yes, but I suppose common wisdom has been proven wrong over the years, especially at the exponential rate of some of these technologies. But what I was wanting to talk about was a link between these 800 million job losses. I think Jack Ma was at a really captivating YouTube clip about his take on the education system. And what stuck with me was we've actually been training people to be computers all of these decades. And we're sitting in one of the best education institutions in the country, but that's what we've been doing. We've been cramming them full of information and training them to extract that information at the right point in time and apply it. And computers will kick our asses if that's all that we're going to do. So to Nadia's point, was it Nadia?
I think it was Nadia who
Nadia's
talked about ingenuity.
I think that is the secret sauce. Because for me, what the fourth industrial revolution represents from a humanity perspective is a phenomenal opportunity to unleash that creative, innovative, ingenious potential that has been locked in most human brains. I mean, we've got some trained people here, they can talk about the percentage we use of our brains. That is a new era, where more and more of the tasks that we've been, it's sometimes not by choice, trained to do, can be done by machines, where we should be applying ourselves to say, how do we radically transform the education system at all levels, at grassroots, tertiary, and executive levels, to empower people to untap this creative ability which we have, because we can now assume that machines will execute, and that's always been our constraint: is how do we execute? And if we take that away, we should be able to deal with a lot more creativity.
No, I think that's really interesting, and I want to let the audience in online here as well. And I have three questions that I'm going to try to cluster together and open up to the panel, which I talked to what I think also talks to what you just said, Kamal, in terms of, you know, how do we make technology work there for us? And Paul talks to what happens to democratic governance. What can democratic governance be? Equally, then Mike says, what happens? And I think it's Andrea firstly who said, well, how can this help developing nations, for example? And Mike asked, and poor communities. So how can we make actually technology then work for democratic governance in the interest of, you know, working for poor communities and in developing context maybe? Is there yeah.
Can you take it?
Well, from a movie point of view, if we believe Star Trek, you know, then food and food shortages won't be a problem, because we'll just ask the computer to give us a nice steak and a warm coffee, and it actually will not be the real thing. It will just be a tablet that gives you the sensation of having had a steak, because the brain needs to just have a chemical message to be satisfied. What I'm saying is that technology can, if cultivated properly, assist with things like GMO, food shortages, preservation of water, how to do it better. These are what technologies can offer and bring to the party. The problem with that equation is that we've seen how Africa has always remained a captive market for technology. Because the problem is that technology is not just given freely. Someone has to pay for it. Elon Musk is not going to send someone to the moon for free. Someone has to fork out some serious amount of dough. And that is the problem with the question around developing countries, which is that we might develop these. And yes, I agree with Toby. It's true that Africa as a marker now also has mobile technology. They've got smartphones and so on. And we know to empower the poorest of the poor, at least if they can have some kind of device with prepaid, it means they are connected, they can look for work, and so on and so forth. So technology does bring that positive element. The problem is that if we are going to continue with the world order within a capitalist system, where Silicon Valley types want a return on investment, then unfortunately technology is not going to be assisting the poor of the poor, because we simply won't be able to afford it.
And this talks as well, I think, ethics and leadership, and it's something that I like to always emphasize in these conversations, is that actually we need to take charge, we need to have good leadership in these spaces, probably even on a global scale and on a global level, but then also to talk to how do we furnish ethics and what role does ethics play in good governance, for example. But I know Bongani and Nicola, you both. Bongani, you want to say something?
Yeah. I just wanted to basically add on what you were saying. I think that there's two things. One is that technology is starting to open up questions around governance, because if you look at South Africa, we're starting to ask questions about regulating Uber, Airbnb, and so on and so forth, right? But if you look at that, it's actually technology that is actually generating money for the ordinary person on the street. But we're starting to question those things. So now the next thing would be using this term loosely, disruption, is that the stuff that we're going to be seeing a lot more potentially is to give a lot more power to the ordinary person, right? To your point in terms of having access to internet, be able to apply for jobs and so on and so forth. But this is what I always say. The problem with humanity is we've got a tendency to basically mess up a good thing that is being developed, right? And my closing remarks in that same sentence or comment would be that if it was possible for humans to capture oxygen, someone was going to do it and sell it. And the poor people were going to die, right? So if you take that as an analogy, that's essentially what humans are doing. So you've got this new oxygen called AI, which is supposed to be actually giving people betterment in terms of what they do. But again, coming to a Silicon Valley type of structure, people are going to capture this and say, how can we capitalize on this, right? Instead of bringing back the power to the people, we're going to now enforce certain rules, certain laws, and so on and so forth, and we'll find ourselves in a situation where a gun was not actually created to kill a person, right? But now we're using it to do that. So the question of technology is, we know that we're doing this for the betterment of humanity, but at the end of the day, we're not using it to do that. And that's where the biggest fear and concern is coming from. Because if I can build technology to capture oxygen, I'm going to be a trillionaire. It's as simple as that. And people will have to pay for it. Because there's free things that you think about. There's water, which is supposed to be free to an extent. There's electricity, or at least energy. The only thing that people are unable to capture is oxygen. And that's where the biggest problem is.
We see that with pollution and
precisely
fears all over the world.
Precisely, right? You look at the rising of the oceans. In the next 50 years, 200 years, it's estimated that it'll go up by a meter or 2 meters, right? Which means that it's going to take up a lot of land, right? And the people who are supposed to be taking those decisions to reduce the carbon emissions, they're not taking those decisions precisely because they're sitting there with the fear that if I actually make this decision to reduce the carbon emission, I'm going to lose the fat check that I'm getting. So the idea around it is like, I'm not going to be here in the next 50 years, so they'll sort it out. And then, let's do what we do. I mean, if you look at what Eskom is doing at the moment, they're providing 97% of energy in the country, they're using 2% of their clean water to basically clean coal, right? So you're taking 2% of the entire country's water, which was supposed to be given to people for free, you're cleaning coal. You don't want to sign an agreement for free independent producers who can come up with alternative means to generate energy, so that you can reduce that 2% to at least 0.5%. You can take that 1.5% of clean water and give it to the ordinary people in the street.
Give it to Cape Town.
Exactly. So that's where the problem is, right? So we live in a capitalist world, and unfortunately, whether you look at technology to be solving problems, yes, it will do that. But the challenge is to what extent, and what are new policies that we need to look at as a planet.
Well, I think, if you don't mind me
Yes.
jumping in, I think how that relates to this debate tonight is that so many decisions in the world are made on gut instinct and not on data. And we live in a world where so much data is available for so many things that we do, for so much stuff. Like, I didn't know it was a 2% of the country's water. We live in a world where big data can inform better decisions, smarter decisions, more effective decisions. If you saw the movie Moneyball about American baseball players, a fascinating film starring Brad Pitt. I went and I read the book, and what this guy who came up with this idea proposed is that the baseball scouts and the baseball coaches were looking at the wrong data. They were looking at how well did he throw, how well did he run. Actually, that's irrelevant. How well did he hit the ball on X, Y, and Z in X, Y, and Z circumstances? And if you extrapolate that to the kind of decisions we make around healthcare or providing water or electricity, we're stuck in an age where we think we need coal-fired solutions. We don't.
Yeah.
$42 billion a year is spent maintaining the electricity grid in Africa.
Precisely.
And we have 300 days of sunlight every year.
Yeah.
Why are we not exploring solar? Why? Because the kickbacks are bigger. Why does Eskom build 300 billion rands worth of unnecessary debt into what it does? Because the kickbacks are bigger.
Yeah.
Whereas solar is effectively free once you've paid off the startup costs, the capex to get the panels and the batteries and everything else. Why do governments not pursue that? Well, because the kickbacks are bigger on other projects.
Precisely.
So if we take the available data and we look at it in a different way, and the theme is creating tomorrow, what is the future going to look like? Well, the future looks like a very efficient way of doing what we've been doing without the heavy expenditure of the previous economy. And there was a great line in The Economist I read years ago, just when the internet was kicking off, about 15 years ago, and at the time the internet was called the new economy. E-commerce didn't exist, internet banking didn't exist. And the line was, the best thing about the new economy is it's going to make the old economy more efficient. And if we look at that now in terms of the new economy, what is the new economy? It's e-commerce. It's more efficient ways of doing things. It may not necessarily be Amazon's model of doing things, because Amazon has been able to build itself into the world's second $1 trillion company by paying its staff very little, and its profit margins are much higher. And they've got an increase this week of something like, it was 15 or 20 cents an hour each, which is not particularly significant. But if you look at the new ways of doing business, it's so much more efficient. Well, sure it is, but it has major challenges for the old way of doing business, which employs more people. Okay, how do we retrain those people? How do we find other jobs for those people to do? Do we believe the fear-mongering that, automation and AI will take our jobs? Do we believe the counter studies that say technology creates more jobs? Well, let's see the evidence of it. Let's try a little case study. Let's do a few things here and there. I personally think that the gig economy is a misnomer. Sure, you're able to be your own boss and drive an Uber or a Lyft car whenever you want, but the problem is that previously you worked for 8 hours, but you got a whole bunch of things as part of your job contract. You got insurance, you got medical aid, you got leave, 21 days a year. You got a whole bunch of things that came with it. You got the tools to do your job paid for by your employer. Now, in the gig economy, all of those things that were once a part of the package that you put in your 8 hours for, you have to pay yourself, including insurance petrol, all of those things. That's not necessarily a better thing. I speak to Uber drivers all the time. I don't think they have a better life. The New York Times and other American newspapers run features often about how these Uber drivers will sleep in their cars, drive to a conference city like Austin for South by Southwest, and work for 10 days straight, sleeping in their car in car parks so that they can make a decent income. That's not making humanity a better place. It's making some people at the top of the pyramid a lot richer, but it's not making humanity a better place, even if people are now their own bosses.
Now, I hear you, and I want to turn to you, Babu, and ask about, I mean, but basically what this boils down to here is sort of the haves and have-nots. Okay? So who will come out the winner in this game?
Okay, I'll come to that. I'll come to that because someone has asked about democracy, and actually technology has made democracy the most accountable. Because if you see the voting, many countries do electronic voting machines. It is very difficult to tamper. The paper voting, you can rig voting. Now with technology, if you see, if a leader does something wrong, it is already within minutes on the Facebook. So he becomes accountable. If blockchain becomes popular, then the transactions and everything will be recorded in the blocks. So you can pinpoint that who is responsible for the fraud. So basically, democracy will become more accountable with, and it has become over the years, has become more accountable with the advancement of technology. The other thing that came up is poor communities. Technology in previously also has helped poor communities, and in future also, to my understanding, will help poor communities. Because when mobile phone came into picture, before that, if mobile phone was not there till date, then also we would not bring in the villages into the communication network with the landline phones. Now this mobile phone has shifted the total economy even, means bringing them into mainstream, the villages and the remote areas. So it wouldn't have been possible if mobile technology was not available. Now, I was reading the other day that you can build a house within 50,000 rands using 3D printer within 24 hours. Now, that is for the low-cost housing, for the financially backward. So that is why I feel that these are some of the things. Means another thing that, for example, with the help of big data, as Toby was saying, we can manage disease. We can manage chronic diseases. And we can give healthcare at a much lower cost. Means basically, and this lower cost healthcare can be delivered to the poor, and we can save money also using technology, artificial intelligence, looking at the data. So these are some of the things. The other thing that you were asking was?
No, just who comes out on top in this, so I think that, let's stay with big data for a while. So
okay.
It's often said that, whoever controls the big data will be the winner in this game. And we will have, as you said, Bongani, whoever can control the oxygen will be, the new zillionaires in this game. Okay? So, but if you would have a guess, who wins? Who will be the powerful?
Actually, who is having creativity and who is having knowledge, he will be the winner. Basically, if you see Facebook today, a $1 billion company, but it was the idea and the knowledge which led to it. Most of the tech companies was the idea. Basically, Uber that we were talking of, the shared economy that we are talking of, it is the idea and the knowledge to implement it. And another advantage of the knowledge-based economy is that in the first industrial revolution, to a certain extent, the second industrial revolution, it was not in that respect, high respect, knowledge-based. So it was basically dominated by men Now, in knowledge-based kind of revolutions, like the third one with computers, the fourth one with data, women can equally take part, because you don't need huge amount of muscle power and manpower to push some big, huge machine. So they can equally take part. To a certain extent, women are more creative, so they can develop new things. So my feeling is that those who will be having the knowledge and those who will be having the creativity, they will be the winner.
I'm not wanting to disagree, Ilva, but you know, the truth of we already have examples where creativity and ideas have come from Africa, have come from the developing world, and it simply gets bought. You get bought out. I mean, Mark Shuttleworth is an example.
Okay, but you got bought out for $500 million.
Sure. But he's just one person that benefited.
It's
Yeah.
not just the
Well,
violence. Sorry, Toby, go ahead. But you know, my only comment is the lack of a proper venture capital market in this country. It forces you out. You know, I've been raising money for
Risk
ideas.
capital.
Yeah, absolutely. So that's one of the remedies. If you want to keep the innovation here, then create a platform to fund them, or they'll go where there's funding. Sorry, Toby.
no.
So I just wanted to comment. I just want to make sure that we're on the same page with regards to your question around who's going to be a winner, and I'm not sure if that question is actually relevant in a way in terms of who's going to win or not. And the reason for that is because, you know, I'm going to give you a simple example. So you have an individual who wants to apply for a loan at the bank. The bank says, give me your data in order for me to be able to assess if I can give you a loan. The bank then goes to a credit bureau and says, give me a score of this individual. Here's a problem. As an individual, in order for me to get my credit score, I need to pay for that report. I'm paying for the report for the data I provided to the bank. The bank needs to pay the credit provider for the data that they gave the credit provider, right? So at the end of the day, the person who's losing in the ecosystem is an individual. So now the question of who's supposed to be a winner should be if technology can allow an individual to own his own data and exposes that data to the person that he wants to expose it to, as opposed to organizations owning our data on our behalf and we buying that data back. You look at Facebook, it's a $1 billion whatever company, right? But what makes it to be at that state? It's people's data because of people are contributing, right? So essentially, I'm actually the customer when I'm in Facebook. I'm being sold by Facebook to organizations, right? And I'm not getting a cent of that transaction, right? Similarly, in the same context that I've just said, why should I be paying a credit provider for the data that I've provided to the credit provider, and the credit provider is actually taking my monthly installments, taking that data, giving it to a credit provider. 2 years later, when I come back and say, I want to buy a house, I go back to them and say, I want to apply. They actually ask the credit provider for the data that they've provided. So who's actually a loser? It's an individual. So technologies like blockchain should then allow users to be able to own their own data in a private and public key manner, where if I want to do anything, people need to ask my identity and I can allow them to do that, and they need to pay me back. If you look at how people are making money from a Bitcoin perspective, it's precisely that, because I'm an individual, I'm actually making money on a basis that I'm approving transactions, right? I'm a miner. Why is it that technology doesn't allow people to become holders of data? Organizations need to pay me to ask for my data because of I want to transact with them. So to ask a question of whether who's going to be a winner, if technology can bring us back to the basics of people owning their own data and organizations asking for that data or even paying for it, then everyone is going to be in an equal foot in terms of how we make money.
Well, I agree with you, Bongani. I think we'll look back at the first few decades of social media and history will be just aghast at how easily we surrendered our privacy and we surrendered our personal data, you're quite correct that we are the customer. We are what Facebook is selling, not us. And the counter argument is that, well, if it, it's for free, therefore we're able to provide it. I don't buy it, but I think we kind of, it's a bit of a conundrum, because how will we get to that place where our data is our own? Well, the European model, the GDPR, is a very good one. I've just been in Europe, and every site I've been to is fantastic in how it asks whether you can use your data instead of the binary accept or you can't use us. There are options where you can not accept till you have someone's cookie, and that's a new era. How does that fit into how algorithms are going to make our life easier? Well, we are able to track how people are tracking us as a first departure. Secondly, the thing about algorithms is that there's a misconception that if a bank manager does a credit check and they walk in and they see that the person is black, they're going to instantly have a feeling that they won't be able to pay, or whatever prejudices they have. Well, it turns out those kind of prejudices can be programmed into the algorithm as well. As numerous very high-profile cases have shown. Is the algorithm going to be any more neutral than anyone else? Well, it depends on the data set. It depends on what informs the algorithm. So algorithms and automation and better ways of doing things aren't necessarily more ethical ways of doing things. There aren't more equitable ways of doing things. The algorithm 60 years ago in Europe would have completely disadvantaged me because I'm Jewish. The algorithm would have seen me in a different way. It's the shifting cultural norms that have an impact on automation. So we have to be careful of advocating a new world, not that anyone on this panel is, based on the purity or the ethical wholeness of a system, because the system is programmed by us, and whoever us is in that case, we have our own prejudices.
I think this is really, really important, and we're getting to some of the nitty-gritties here. And I think that one of the questions that often comes up in this space is about new literacy, so digital literacy, for example. So how do we're very bad at protecting ourselves online, and we've had actually questions from our audience online, and Miranda asked about what about cybersecurity, cyber attacks. Winnie talks about what happens when computers or algorithms malfunction, and how do we protect ourselves, and what kind of literacies, digital literacies, do we need? I don't know, Nicola, do you have any ideas around that?
Look, what you feed the algorithm is going to determine what comes out, and I think part of the fear, back to the fear again. People is that these algorithms are going to take over and make all the decisions for us and so on. And particularly now, we need to be really involved in auditing where they go and what happens.
Forget about friends audits. We need an algorithm audit.
Algorithm audit.
The algorithm strikes back.
Yeah. So I'm going to use an example in recruiting, right? So and this comes into. People say algorithms are going to remove bias completely from the recruiting process. Bongani laughs because he knows. And you say, great, we're not going to take anything like race and gender into consideration. It's really only going to be stuff around education. And you, everyone thinks this is wonderful. It's a completely unbiased algorithm. And it ends up that you're still selecting white Ivy League school goers who fit a certain profile. And you go back and interrogate the algorithm and you say, well, how they're selecting these fantastic people for this job is based on whether or not they played water polo or lacrosse. Because that was the key decision.
Or they're white, or Ivy League.
Exactly. So we have to make sure ethically that we still interrogate the algorithm to make sure it isn't discriminating. and creating bias.
I feel like I have to come out in defense of the algorithm, because what algorithms are really good at is picking up fraud, making decisions around who to give credit to without those kind of biases. I mean, there's some very good examples of how that's being done. You know, I mean, the algorithms are probably better at packing a warehouse and knowing when to pack and how to do it. But I agree with you. I mean, the fundamental problem is that what is the input data?
Right.
Who decides what's good at a job? I mean, the research has always been, if you want to find someone who's really hardworking and is determined to make a go of their life, find an immigrant. Why? Because they've made the effort to come to the country, to start a new life, to do something different. You know, and that's definitely a thing up, and yet most recruiting practices would look down on that. Why? Because of prejudice.
And also on a more practical level, there's language, accents, there's facial recognition. These are all things that you still have to input the data. And depending on where the algorithm was developed, etc., it has innate biases.
I mean, let's look at what algorithms could do for fake news, which is very important to our industry. Turns out they're not that good. Why? Because the people who wrote the algorithms speak English. You know, they don't speak whatever language is being used to spread the to spread hate speech in in Myanmar, for instance.
The age-old technology acronym, garbage in, garbage out.
Garbage in, garbage out.
And the bigger the computer, the faster the process goes. And that's garbage in, garbage in.
And I think that this is maybe also the lesson learned, and I'm glad, Toby, that you raised the journalism here, and fake news, for example, as an example, because I think that, yes, actually we turn here to algorithms as, you know, we want to make programming, and I know that Google, Facebook, for example, are looking at this. How do we, can we develop algorithms to detect fake news, for example? And at the same time, we know then that might not be possible, you know, but there are challenges in that space. And
I mean,
on the other hand, you know, this idea then of big data, so we're talking about big data as some, you know, dangerous in some spaces, but then also, of course, for journalism. I always say that journalists can actually, for once, go back to, you know, the very basics of getting out there on the street and talking to people, having conversations, and letting big data do other things, you know. But we still need someone to interpret the big data.
Exactly. You know, you've got data. Data is another source. You have to interrogate that source as you do any other source. You have to get a second opinion. You have to verify it. You have to get a second source. Bloomberg's done a very interesting thing where they feed financial data in a spreadsheet into an algorithm, and it writes a financial report, and it writes it in 3 seconds. You know, whereas a journalist who drinks coffee, stands outside, smokes a cigarette, takes an hour, 2 hours. You know, so that's the kind of run-of-the-mill journalism that can be automated and frees up journalists to do more important things like investigations or thought pieces or more thoughtful, engaged writing. So kind of breaking news and financial news, that can be written by a computer. Why not? You know,
that's also another aspect that is under-investigated, I think, which is how technology has changed our behavior. I mean, like Toby, I've just recently come back from London, and it's absolutely astonishing. People just don't talk to each other. Whether you are in the underground, whether you are at the train station, we might as well be in a quiet zone because everyone's got earphones in their ears and is very involved with the phone, or is just selecting music, or somebody's watching a movie, but they are certainly not communicating with each other.
If you have teenagers at home, you know exactly.
Teenagers are Londoners on the tube.
Exactly, yes. Teenagers are exactly like Londoners on the tube. Yes.
So I think one of the problems with algorithms is actually self-learning. Right, so because of these things are able to self-learn, you can't control what they're learning, and you know, in some instances you might not even know where this algorithm is at in terms of how much it has learned, because it was able to collect as much data as possible that you actually did not necessarily fit it into it. So I think one of the fears is basically to say that if robotics are actually self-learning to a point that they realize that actually the threat for me to continue is human, then what? because you're actually now giving a lot more data to these machines, and then they realize that actually in order for us to make more money or to make better decisions, the blocker is human. So let's eradicate the problem, right? So that we can move forward. What do you do, right? And I think
not human programming. The problem is a problem program. Because remember, the machines think in programs.
Yes.
And this program that's called human has got flaws.
Precisely.
And it's actually defective. It makes irrational decisions.
That's it.
It gets emotional, so it needs to be deleted.
Yeah. I
So,
mean, if
you mean
you
humans are Springbok rugby players? Make bad decisions, sorry.
sorry. I mean, if you take some of the intelligence that is now being built into cars, where you can literally drive a car, but the algorithm in the car can start to realize that you're not driving in a more efficient way, and it takes over, right? So it's those sorts of things that when you start to think about it, that we might actually get to a point where we're being eradicated if we do get to that point.
But that's the fear mongering, and Elon Musk is arguably the biggest proponent of not letting AIs make the kill decision. And that just means that the system has to have ground rules built into it, which is don't kill the humans.
You've got hackers at the moment, right? Yeah. So you can imagine what these guys can do.
It's a point of weakness. That's something we have to accept. It's a point of weakness.
Google currently is having teams of people that main job is just to develop kill switches, so that if the machine goes ballistic, because remember we're talking in our realm about self-driving cars and the toaster. In other environments, it's a drone that has a payload that can destroy thousands of people. When machines go haywire, and they are spending millions on trying to develop kill switches precisely because of this self-thinking and self-learning.
It's actually not thinking; it's executing. There's no emotion in it. That's the fear.
Listen, there's a case to be made for AI and toasters, right?
Yeah, I like the AI.
I know it's a little facetious, but whoever gets the toast the way they want it, right? This is a real problem for humanity.
Come on, please.
Yes. I actually wanted to. Somebody asked a question on digital literacy, and I think that's it's a powerful point because. And I think it touches on AI also being interpreted as augmented intelligence. And that's a big deal for me because the type of examples we're talking about here and the potential future for the humanity is about coexistence and leveraging technology. It's about being able to use technology in a cohabited way. So it's not one or the other. And the digital literacy, longer term digital literacy, apart from knowing where the off button is when an algorithm goes wrong, is about how to do that. And what are the skills we are going to need to build for ourselves and the future generations to be able to harness the power of technology as opposed to oppose it.
Can I add something to that?
You need to wrap up, but quickly, the first thing,
just particularly in the South African context, we have to think about building digital literacy into our education systems. We're sitting currently with rural schools where people have one classroom learning grades 1, 2, and 3 sitting in the same classroom as each other. How do you take those people to a point where they can be digitally literate, to be able to function in this world where it's a core requirement? And we need to think very hard, government needs to think very hard, but they can't do everything. We need to find ways to be able to bring people to the point where technology is available to everyone, no matter where you're from.
I think we need to apply that. I agree with you. We need to apply that to the education system itself. The education system was designed in the early 1900s to give factory employees just enough education not to run their fingers through a sewing machine and to read instructions. And we need to seriously rethink how we educate ourselves. How do we educate our youth? Africa, the biggest change in Africa, according to the great Hans Rosling, the statistician, is that in the next 8 years or so, Africa's population is going to go from the current 1.1 billion to 4 billion. We are going to have billions of people who need to be educated in a way that is meaningful for the future of the world. And that's what I think we should be spending our time worrying about. Like, if we worry about education in the same way that we should be worrying about water, and not worrying about how Eskom is going to, bring the economy down, that would be a much better use of our time and capacity, because our kids need to be educated in a way that's going to make them, give them an education and make them functional in a world where maybe you won't have to drive a car.
Yeah. But I think
the biggest... I think that we are going to unfortunately have to wrap up. And quick note, Bongani?
Yeah, no, I think I just wanted to add on what you were saying. I think the biggest question is what will be the role of government going forward? Because if you look at all these technological advancement, government is actually less involved. You look at Uber, Airbnb, and whatever, right? You can go into different verticals. But the point is, when you talk about education, how much would that responsibility be for government? Because I think the issue is that they're just sitting there to formulate policies to cap certain things not to happen or to happen. So how much of government will actually play this role to actually advance education?
Thank you for that. And there have been a couple of questions actually around what is government doing, are they ready for this, and so forth. And I think that maybe it's a topic that we can take forward for another discussion as well. I think that's really important. But I think there are a lot of lessons that we've taken away from tonight. One lesson that I take away, and I think because we are in an educational setup, we are at the university, and we're trying to furnish debates around, how to grapple with these things. I think the education question is hugely important. And we often talk about the 4 C's, communication, collaborations, critical thinking, and skills that are sort of, also have an idea that comes back then to all of these very kind of, quite debates that are, that's going to shape our future going forward. And I think that the creative and critical thinking is very important, and communications and collaborations, are going to be hugely important for us. So thank you very, very, very much for your engagements tonight. And I think it's been absolutely fascinating. And I think there are much more to say on the topic. And we are going to have another cloud debate on the 30th of October. And then we're going to talk about what does it mean, and what are the challenges of raising children in Industry 4.0, and the teenagers sitting at home, the London Tube, these are some of the discussions that will come up then. But for now, I want to say thank you for those of you who have participated online and from wherever you've been, at home, at the office, or in the car, or on the tube maybe in London, or somewhere else in the world. But thank you, Toby, Nicola, Bongani, Kamal, Oscar, Babu.
Thank you.
Thank you very, very much. It's been an absolute pleasure.
Thank you.